Your Excellency, dear friends of the Danish Institute in Athens, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, kalispera. I am Marianne Pade, Chair of the Board of the Danish Institute, and it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all here at the Acropolis Museum for the annual meeting of the Institute. 2024 was an exciting year at the Danish Institute. We have welcomed our new Vice Director, classical philologist Rasmus Seelsted. The Institute has more or less implemented its new visual identity, which impacts everything from bags to publications and our website, and it has hosted and participated in a true cornucopia of research and cultural activity. As you will hear later this evening, the Danish Institute has a wide network of Greek, Danish, and international collaborations, which enable us to engage in a broad range of activities, ranging from film projections, concert, teaching, publications, seminars, and lecture series on archaeology, ancient history, art history, reception studies, oral storytelling, and much more. Dr. Sanne Hoffmann, the director of the Danish Institute, will tell you more about all this in a moment. But before I give the word to her, I'll take the occasion to thank the Ephorate and the Greek Ministry of Culture, which have supported our work, the Danish ministries and private foundations, which have supported us financially, and not least the entire staff of the Danish Institute in Athens for their amazing work. And now I give the word to Dr. Sanne Hoffmann. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for the nice introduction. Αγαπητοί επιτιμοί προσκεκλήμενοι, αγαπητές επιτιμές προσκεκλήμενες, αγαπητοί εκλεκτοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητές εκλεκτές συνάδελφοι, φίλοι και φίλες του Ινστιτούτου της Δανίας στην Αθήνα. Είναι για μένα μεγάλη χαρά και τιμή να σας καλωσορίσω απόψε στην 33η ετήσια ανοιχτή συνάντηση του Ινστιτούτου της Δανίας στην Αθήνα. Πρώτα απ' όλα, εκ μέρους του Ινστιτούτου και όλων των συνεργατών μας, απευθύνουμε τις θερμότερες ευχαριστίες μας προς το Υπουργείο Πολιτισμού και Αθλητισμού της Ελλάδας και όλες τις εφορίες αρχαιοτήτων, με τις οποίες είχαμε την ευκαιρία να συνεργαστούμε το 2024, αλλά και κατά το προηγούμενο χρονιά. Είμαστε ιδιαίτερα περήφανοι που αποτελούμε μέρος αυτών των θετικών, γόνιμων και σημαντικών συνεργασιών μεταξύ των ξένων Ινστιτούτων και του Ελληνικού Υπουργείου και των Εφοριών και εκφράζουμε την βαθιά μας ευγνωμοσύνη προς όλους και όλες, όσοι και όσες είχαμε το μεγάλο προνομίο να συνεργαστούμε. Dear honored guests, dear esteemed colleagues and friends of the Danish Institute, it is a great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all this evening to the 33rd annual open meeting of the Danish Institute at Athens. And again, on behalf of the Institute and all our associates, I would like to send our warmest thanks to the Greek Ministry of Culture and Sport and all the archaeological efforts which we have had the opportunity to collaborate with in 2024 and many of the years before. We take great pride in being part of the very positive, fruitful, and important collaborations between the foreign institutes and the Greek Ministry and the efforts, and are very grateful to all that we have had the privilege of collaborating with. The Danish Institute also wishes to acknowledge and thank our board and all its members for their support, as well as the conglomerate of institutions they represent, which administer, facilitate, and support us, and to all of which we are very grateful. A special mention goes to our housing institution, the Danish Ministry of Higher Education and Science, that has been very supportive this last year and of which we are immensely grateful. I also want to give my warmest thanks to the staff of 2024 for all of their hard work and efforts, keeping the Institute steady and moving forward. This year we were joined by our new Assistant Director, Dr. Rasmus Seelsted, who is a much appreciated and welcome addition to our small group. We were also joined by the new Carlsberg Fellow and postdoc Benjamin Pedersen. Every 2 years, the Carlsberg Foundation generously funds this postdoc position, a highly valuable contribution to the research carried out at the Institute, as well as a much appreciated addition to our staff group. Sadly, in August 2024, we lost our former director, Dr. Erik Hallager. Erik was a renowned field archaeologist and expert in Minoan culture. From 2004 to 2010, he was an energetic director of the Institute, editing several volumes of the Institute's monograph series and founding the Minoan seminars, which continue still. He had since 1973 led the Swedish part of the Greek-Swedish excavations in Hanja, which during his director years became a valued collaboration for the Danish Institute. Together with his wife, Birgitta Hallager, he remained active on the project and worked continuously on the publications of many important finds and results from the excavations. And we have lost an esteemed and dear colleague, and we send our deepest condolences to his wife, family, and friends. The Nordic Library at Athens represents a much appreciated collaboration of the Danish Institute. And allow me to stress how very much we value being part of this unique Nordic collaboration that allows us to count the Swedish, Finnish, and Norwegian institutes, as well as the library staff, as our close and highly regarded colleagues. This year marked the highest numbers of users recorded since the library opened in 1995, which is a testament to the attractive research environment the library provides for not only Nordic scholars, but also Greek and foreign scholars who are members of the various research institutions and archaeological schools of Greece. A special thanks goes to our head librarian, Patrick Talatas, and Antti Lampinen, our senior research librarian in 2024, for their attentive and very competent efforts at the library, creating such a positive research environment. We also extend our gratitude to Petra Pakkanen, who held the chairmanship of the library in 23 to 24, and Jenny Wallensten, who is currently holding the position. And finally, a very warm welcome to our new research librarian, Eddie Bjørklof. One of the researchers benefiting from the research environment at the Nordic Library and the Danish Institute is Benjamin Pedersen, our postdoctoral Carlsberg Fellow. His project is entitled Philosophizing History, the Impact of Aristotelian Thought on Hellenistic Historiography. The aim of the project is to reevaluate historical writing in the Hellenistic period through the lens of the intellectual achievements of Aristotle and his followers, the Peripatetics. By using innovative methods from emotion and genre studies, the project tests the hypothesis that Hellenistic historiography finds its underpinnings in Aristotelian thought. The study traces how Aristotelian ideas migrated into subsequent writing and how the interlinkage of philosophical innovations and historical developments changed the way history was organized and written in the Hellenistic period. The output is to be 3 articles, with one already submitted, that discuss to what extent the emergence of ancient biographies is found within the context of peripatetic philosophy. The remaining 2 articles examine whether the organizational principle of grand-scale historical works has a philosophical origin and to what degree the Aristotelian understanding of emotional persuasion lay at the heart of historical analysis in the Hellenistic period. Benjamin is also editing the upcoming volume 11 of the Proceedings of the Danish Institute at Athens, as well as organizing a conference on emotion and cognition in ancient historical writing to be held at the Institute in November. Our other Carlsberg Fellow and PhD student, Panos Athanasopoulos, is currently working diligently on the forthcoming publication of the Lycaon Harbour project. The publication has multiple contributions, including from co-directors of the project, Bjørn Lovén and Dimitris Kokomelis, and we look very much forward to seeing the results from this most interesting site. The Danish Institute is both a research and cultural institute, and one of the primary ways in which we can facilitate and promote academic and cultural work is through our residencies. We have seven rooms at our disposal to offer to residents, 3 in Plaga and 7 in Niels Kosmos. And our buildings were very generously donated by the Carlsberg Foundation as well as the A.P. Møller Foundation together with the Velux and Carlsberg Foundations. In 2024, generous grants from the new Carlsberg Foundation supporting researchers and artists and from the GEC Gads Foundation supporting high school teachers allowed us to offer residencies to altogether 25 researchers, 32 artists, 9 high school teachers, 13 authors and journalists, 6 musicians and composers, 4 architects, and 17 university students. We benefit from a very high number of applicants for each deadline, and we are grateful for the interest as well as the generosity of the foundations that allow us to continue to house and facilitate so many dedicated researchers and artists each year. The Danish Institute each year has the pleasure of receiving and facilitating numerous classes from the Danish language and science gymnasia and high schools. In 2024, DIA assisted 32 classes with their excursions to the many cultural and archaeological sites in Athens and Greece, and we hosted 20 classes that came to visit the Institute. The presentations at DIA include an introduction to the work and research carried out at the Institute, followed by a presentation of Greece and Greek society by the Embassy of Denmark in Athens that also organized the school visits to the Institute. As part of our educational program, every 2 years, we organize a course for university students from the classical studies, philology, history, and archaeology. The course is organized in collaboration with Copenhagen, Aarhus, and Southern Denmark universities. And this year, Associate Professor of Copenhagen, Christian Amitsbøl Thomsen, and Associate Professor from Aarhus, George Hinge, took part in the organization and education. We also had the privilege of guided tours of the Parthenon by Vasilia Manidaki, of the Dionysus Theatre by Christina Pavastamati von Muck, of the ancient Agora by John K. Papadopoulos, of ancient Lavrion by Andreas Kapitanias, and ancient Kalydon by Søren Handberg, all offering unique experiences for the students, all of whom we are very grateful for their generous time and help. Our courses receive invaluable support from the GEC Gades Foundation, without which these courses would not be possible. As part of the Institute's cultural program in 2023 and the spring of 2024, we held an underwater archaeology and cultural resources lecture series that was carried out as double lectures between Danish and Greek scholars. This was to cast a light on the two countries who are both on the forefront of exploring, preserving, and communicating underwater cultural heritage, and to create a dialogue between experts from both areas, while also sharing the topic with a broad audience. This series has allowed the Danish Institute to facilitate new conversations and new connections between two geographically distant but scientifically very close parties. The lecture series was generously funded by the Danish Ministry of Culture International Collaboration Grant. For the organization of the lectures, I was fortunate enough to have the help from my co-organizers, Dimitris Kokosmelis, as well as Panos Athanasopoulos and Athena Tragadas, the two of which are now also co-editors on the forthcoming publication of the lecture series. And you can see here the preliminary cover of the book created by one of the participating lecturers, Alex Turtis. The publication is funded by the Augustinus Foundation and will be part of the monographs of the Danish Institute series. In the fall of 2024, we had the privilege of presenting another theme, the Ancient Incarceration Lecture Series. It was organized in a collaboration with the Prison Project, Materiality of Incarceration in the Mediterranean Antiquity, which is housed at the University of Copenhagen and funded by the Carlsberg Foundation, and also in collaboration with the American School of Classical Studies. And I would like to thank Matthew Larsen, Evan Levine, Bonadi Westcote, and Denmark Graniger for their much appreciated help and support that allowed us to present a very interesting topic to a new and broad audience. Outside of our theme series, we had the opportunity to present lectures for some of our residents and publications from Danish scholars, such as Uffe Holmsgaard Eriksen on his translation of Romanos songs, Carl Bergstrøm Nielsen on how to write scores for experimental music, such as was presented at our last annual meeting, and our board member, Anne Romme, spoke on biometric architecture, and our resident, Christian Dahl, presented his work on ancient Greek novels. Søren Handberg and Alexander Sokolicek spoke on ancient theaters at the presentation of the Kalydon book by Rune Frederiksen and Olympia Vicato, a presentation also made in honor and memory of Rune Frederiksen. Susan Rottruff presented the book on mold-made balls by Pia Agula Bilde, edited by Susan Rottruff, as we sadly lost Pia before she could finish it herself. And so this book presentation was also made in honor and memory of Pia Agula Bilde. We also had a book come out in 2024, which we will be presenting this June the 2nd. From Homer to Hatha Aspects of Oral Narration in the Greek Tradition, is a publication of lecture series organized by then Assistant Director Birgit Olsen, who is also co-editor on this very beautiful volume 26 of our monographs of the Danish Institute at Athens series. In May, the Danish Institute housed and organized, in a collaboration with the Netherlands and Finnish Institute at Athens, The conference, the constant participant, constructing and affirming identity through material culture in ancient Greek sanctuaries and modern museums. The conference took place over the course of 3 days with 22 lectures, and we are currently in the middle of editing the publication. I send my warmest thanks to my co-organizers and co-editors, Anne Brisbard and Petra Pakkanen, whose expertise has been invaluable and whose kind participation made the entire process from suggesting the conference to the current midst of editing an absolute delight. So thank you. In June, the Institute housed a visiting researcher, Professor Aglaé Pizzone from the University of Southern Denmark, who, amongst many activities while in Athens, organized 2 workshops at the Institute. Before Copyright, Pre-Modern Practices of Intellectual Property Protection, and a Rhetoric for the Empire 4th workshop. Included in the cultural program for 2024 were talks by our authors and artists in residence. For example, Signe Christoffersen's talk on her project theme Pleasure Gardens and exhibitions at the Museum of Ancient Art at Aarhus University, as well as author and poet Christina Hehn discussing her most recent publication, which was partly written during previous residencies at the Danish Institute at Athens. We also had the pleasure of presenting a variety of musical performances at the Institute, including Y Ensemble, Mathilde Wallevik with Michael Brownlee Walker, and Sistro Duo, as well as Nana Rashid's performance at the Athens Jazz Festival in June. And in December, we continued our tradition of collaborating with the Embassy of Denmark in Athens on screening Danish films, with the season befitting this time of the year. And in September 24, we launched not only our new website, but also, as Marianne mentioned, the visual profile that came along with it. You can still find us on dearathens.gr, and you can enjoy the new design along with the plentiful information on the Institute and our activities. The website and profile were designed by Kontrapunkt and very generously funded by the New Carlsberg Foundation, Ove and Johanne Louis Hansen's Foundation, and the Augustinus Foundation, for which we are very grateful. Now, I will move on to present the archaeological field projects of the Institute. In 2024, we had 2 active projects in Syros and Calydon, beginning with Syros. In 2024, following a successful pilot project in 2022, the Jade Odyssey project was launched. It is a 5-year collaboration led by senior researcher Dr. Lasse William Sørensen from the National Museum of Denmark, together with Professor Søren Ditz and Dr. Dora Papangelopoulou from the Effort of Antiquities of the Cyclades. The Jade Odyssey project studies the exploitation of jadeite sources and the production of jadeite axes during the Aegean Neolithic. Archaeological surveys of quarries on the Cycladic island of Syros and its neighboring islands aim to uncover evidence of prehistoric societies that organized maritime expeditions, extracted jadeite, and produced axes for exchange and trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, in order to refine our understanding of the socio-economic impacts of this resource exploitation on Neolithic societies. The project is generously funded by the Consul General Gösta Enbom's Foundation, the Danish Ministry of Culture's Research Committee, and the ERC project From Stone to Home, Polished Stone Tools, Biography and their social and economic impact in the Aegean Neolithic. The task of the 2024 field campaign conducted from October 7th to the 26th was to identify and document Neolithic jadeite quarries and associated habitation activities on Syros. The Greek-Danish team focused their efforts on Area 1, situated along the northern side of Campus Valley, stretching from Lea Beach up to the village of Campus. Here, 110 geological formations were documented, and evidence of prehistoric habitation was identified in 6 major activity zones. Due to the density of archaeological remains, the team concentrated their survey on Site 1 and 3 during their campaign. Samples of marine shells, jadeite, obsidian, ceramics, and soil sediments were collected for dating. During the documentation of the jadeite outcrops, the team observed multiple examples of worked jadeite flakes and debitage deliberately placed in the crevices of the boulders. These deposits often consisted of 2 or more flakes, hammerstones, and jadetite preforms, found alongside rounded quartzite beach stones and obsidian flakes, which might be ritual placement connected to the perceptions of crevices in boulders to be portals to the underworld. Additionally, cup marks were identified on 9 boulders throughout the valley. In some cases, these cup marks appeared on the same boulders where objects were deposited. Notably, they were strategically positioned in the landscape, such as directly beneath sites 1 and 3. The working hypothesis suggests that these cup marks functioned as waypoints, guiding travelers from the natural harbor of Lear Beach, marked as Site 4, towards the best raw materials in the valley, which would have been essential for occasional visitors returning to the quarries years or even decades apart. In between campaigns, jadetite samples from every outcrop and geological samples from napping and production sites on Syros will undergo visual characterization, petrographic investigations, and mineralogical and chemical composition analysis in order to provide a geochemical fingerprint for each of the identified jadetite outcrops on Syros. To broaden the dataset, the project will incorporate non-destructive techniques to establish an additional mineralogical and geochemical baseline, enabling provenance analysis that will help trace the origins of polished stone tool assemblages from the Neolithic sites in the Aegean and the Western Anatolia. Based on the results of the geological surveys and 5 fieldwork seasons on Syros, the Jade Odyssey project aims to continuously refine our understanding of the social and economic complexities observed during the Aegean Neolithic. And now moving on to Calydon. Fieldwork conducted in 2024 at Calydon continues the investigations of the sanctuary on Lafrian Hill and the Heroon outside the city. The project brings together both legacy data and new fieldwork to revisit the excavations from the 1920s and 1930s, which were led by Frederik Poulsen and Constantius Romaias. The overall goal of the project is to offer a fresh, updated historical narrative of the sanctuary's development and its cultural importance. The project is a collaboration with the effort of Antiquities and Etolo Acarnania and Lefkada, and is directed by Dr. Olympia Vicato, Director General of Antiquities and Cultural Heritage of the Ministry of Culture, and Dr. Søren Handberg, Associate Professor of Classical Archaeology at the University of Oslo. In 2024, excavations were conducted in 6 distinct locations in the area of the sanctuary and the Heroon, each addressing specific research questions. This report will cover the most noteworthy discoveries at the southern spur of the Sanctuary Hill, the area south of the Hellenistic Stoa, and at the Heroon. A central concern of the 2024 investigation was the ongoing exploration of the area around Building H, located immediately east of the archaic antitemple, Temple A. The basic division between an upper yellowish layer and a lower darker layer, noticed to the north of the foundations of Building H in 2023, was also recognized to the south. The upper deposit contains ceramics from the Bronze Age to the Archaic period, whereas finds in the lower layer seemed confined to the late early and middle Helladic periods. Like in 2023, the area produced many fragments of Bronze Age pottery and lithics. At the eastern edge of the plateau, a layer with larger pithos fragments dating to the Bronze Age was identified. Part of the upper context appears to have eroded down the slope. A preliminary interpretation could be that the upper layer is a leveling fill from the late Archaic or early Classical period that was deposited on top of Bronze Age levels. As reported at last year's annual meeting, a small area containing sacrificial debris with burned calcined and very fragmented animal bones was excavated on the lower plateau in the southeastern corner of the Lafrian plateau. Archaic miniature pottery from the deposits suggests continuous deposition in the area from the late 7th century BC until the early 5th century BC. Investigations continued in this area in 2024, which indicated that the entire lower plateau on the eastern side of the spur of the Lafrian Hill was used throughout the Archaic period as a place for the deposition of debris from animal sacrifices, even though the location of the altar remains unknown. Layers of burned animal bones mixed with ash were identified beneath the outer retaining walls, the so-called Terrace Wall 6, and Building F, across a length of more than 25 meters to the north, thus covering an area of more than 125 square meters. If the deposition of sacrificial debris in the area indeed ceased in the early 5th century BC, it signals significant changes in the ritual practices at the sanctuary, which may be connected to broader changes observed during that time. To the north of the foundations of Building H, a small trench was excavated within the apsidal Building D, where previous work in the 1920s had involved only the tracing of its walls. The excavations revealed that the layers inside the building consisted of filled deposits containing pottery of mixed chronology. It is conceivable that this is a Bronze Age building which might have been covered by leveling activities during the late Archaic or early Classical period. A photograph from the excavations in 1926 shows what appears to be a large stone paved area south of the Hellenistic Stoa. However, this paved area was neither included in the plan nor discussed in the publication. Consequently, in 2024, the project conducted excavations in the area. These excavations revealed lone stone wall almost forming a quadrant-shaped foundation extending south of the Stoa. Up to 3 courses of the wall was preserved, resting on soil above bedrock. North of the wall, a stone filling was noted, which, however, did not continue all the way to the Stoa. Some cuts, probably stemming from later digging, were also noted. Finds from the area span chronologically from Hellenistic to early modern periods, including a notable amount of Hellenistic Laconian-type roof tiles. An assemblage of Hellenistic pottery was identified in trench set 6 to 4, and although the date of the structure still needs to be determined, the assemblage might assist in dating the Stoa. In the Huron, with the underground tomb located east of the theatre, investigation continued from the previous years with the dual purpose of gaining a better understanding of the construction date of the complex and reconstructing the interior spaces, particularly room 7, which connects the palestra with the cult room. Small trenches were excavated in rooms 2 and 7, with the most significant findings made in room 7. Both trenches in room 7 yielded pottery and tile fragments from fill layers beneath the complex. Notably, in the trench along the western wall, evidence of two floors was found that might indicate a phase of refurbishment. The preliminary study of the finds indicate a construction date for the building in the late 3rd century, rather than the late 2nd century BC originally suggested by the excavators in 1920. This summer, the project will continue exploring Lafren Hill and expresses its gratitude to the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports for granting the permission, and to the Augustinus Foundation for generous financial support. Gratitude is also due to all the collaborating institutions and individuals for their invaluable contributions to the research projects. And this is where we end the presentation of the Institute's activities of 2024. Thank you for your attention. And so now, it is my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Signe Isager. Signe Isager is a classical philologist educated at the University of Aarhus. Since 1972, she is attached to the University of Southern Denmark as associate professor in ancient history and is now emerita. In 1997, she succeeded Dr. Søren Ditz as the second director of the Danish Institute at Athens. Signe Isager specializes in ancient law, social and economic history, and epigraphy, and has published broadly, such as co-authoring aspects of Athenian society in the 4th century BC with Mogens Hermann Hansen, and a book on ancient Greek agriculture with Jens Erik Skydsgaard. When the Danish Ancient Halikarnassos project, led by Paul Pedersen, began in the beginning of the 1990s, Signe Isager joined the team with special responsibility for the inscriptions. Together with Paul Pedersen, and since 2016, also Jean-Mathieu Carbon, she is finalizing a corpus of all inscriptions from ancient Halikarnassos. The very first proceedings of the Danish Institute at Athens in 1995 was Signe Isager's first published contribution to the Halikarnassos project, co-authored with Pade. Signe Isager's part was a preliminary presentation of the inscriptions in the mosaic floors, one of them a little poem, an epigram in 8 lines, celebrating the fantastic mosaic work and the whole restoration of the building due to its generous owner, whose name is mentioned with discreet emphasis. Tonight we will have the pleasure of Signe Isager's lecture on diplomacy and poetry, messages cut in stone in Athens and Halikarnassos, and please join me in welcoming Signe Isager.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation. Dear colleagues and friends of the Danish Institute, soon it will be 25 years since I left Athens after 4 busy and happy years at the Danish Institute. This marvelous museum existed only as a sketch or model, its foundations not even laid yet. And here we are. It is a great honor for me to be invited to address this audience here. And I heartily thank the Danish Institute for bestowing it on me. You might wonder why the theme this evening must be messages cut in stone in the ancient Greek-speaking world, when our inheritance from antiquity abounds in literature, whole works, prose as well as poetry, that are read and discussed, performed in theaters, and rightly considered a must in our education. Works that as a rule have been through many diligent hands in their transfer from papyrus to parchment, and finally to printed and digital books, translated into innumerable different languages. In short, the main quality of the inscriptions lies in their not having done that tour of transmission. They are physical remains. We can see and touch the letters of the text. Inscriptions cut in stone were a widespread medium of communication in the Greek-speaking world, and yes, often tedious texts. They were generally short and cut for special purpose, often having to do with documentation. For instance, accounts for administration of means belonging to the god or to the state. Inscriptions on stone were also a common, if costly, means of conveying an important message and freezing it if it had to do with power relations. No reason to make schoolboys and girls in later generations learn them by heart, but every reason to have a special eye on them. Only if meant to be permanent or of considerable permanence would a text be inscribed on stone. If not, there were other, faster, lighter, and cheaper ways. Some of the lighter ways could conveniently allow for alterations, which was next to impossible to do discreetly once a text had been inscribed in stone. It did, of course, happen that an inscription became so damaged by years of erosion or perhaps an earthquake that it was at a certain point decided to reinscribe the text in a new support. Also a dangerous moment in the history of the original text. To have the intended effect, the inscription had to be situated in the proper place, where it would be seen, may be read, and in any case remain accessible for later consultation. In its proper place, it would function as and form part of a monument meant to impress, so the material and form of the support and the expertise of the letter cutter were also of utmost importance. Albeit meant to be public and remaining in their place permanently, most inscriptions had an unforeseen afterlife. The inscriptions could lose their relevance to the inhabitants, or they could conflict with a new alliance. so the text would in some cases be totally erased on purpose, and the now slightly thinner support smoothed and reused for another inscription, or the whole inscribed support, if of good marble, could in later times end up in the lime kiln. But less destructive reuse was more often seen. Maybe the support maybe the support had the right measures to serve, e.g., as a building block or as window frames if cut in two, so their story took new directions, and we might still be lucky enough to be able to read the letters and perhaps understand their message, even if the context was now quite another. I have chosen diplomacy and poetry as keywords and will illustrate with just a few examples how official messages cut in stone could serve to create and maintain diplomatic networks in different periods and places. 3 inscriptions will serve as examples, and they illustrate connections between Athens and Halikarnassos, 2 fascinating cities and main targets for my own professional life. Athens will be our point of departure. Geographically, and with its vital harbor, Piraeus, it was situated in the middle of the Greek-speaking world and a center of culture. Politically head of an empire in much of the classical period, Athens is also unique in the number of preserved messages cut in stone. Halikarnassos, on the other hand, was a minor city in comparison and situated in Caria on the west coast of Asia Minor. Halikarnassos is, I believe, first and foremost known for being the birthplace of Herodotus, the father of history, and for housing one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Mausoleum, the monumental tomb built for the dynast Mausolus. The city has an excellent natural harbor looking towards the Aegean, and the about 600 inscriptions we have from Halikarnassos are in the Greek language, very few in Latin as time went by. But the time before the mighty Persian, but the time before the colonization was not forgotten, as we shall see. In later periods, Halikarnassos formed part of the mighty Persian Empire to the east, and at other times it was controlled by or allied with the Greek West. My colleague Paul Peterson has demonstrated how a boom in building activity with innovative architecture characterized periods when the important harbor city enjoyed the goodwill of the Persian Empire. It was in such a time, the second quarter of the 5th century, that a new temple of Apollo was built on the Acropolis of Halikarnassos, and we'll come back to that soon. In Athens, major building activity on the Acropolis began roughly when it stopped in Halikarnassos in the early 440s. I'm speaking, of course, of Propylaea and of the Parthenon, which was finished in 434. As to inscriptions, another manifest sign of Athenian prosperity and power was the huge, well-known stele raised on the Acropolis with the accounts of what the goddess Athena received successively as first fruits from the members of what from being a league was now an empire. For the first stele we are speaking about, in size, mass, and weight, in fact, one of the most gigantic blocks of marble ever quarried in Attica, probably on Mount Penteli. Only a few building blocks of the Parthenon can rival it in size and weight, to quote Ronald Stroud. There are 2 of them in the Epigraphic Museum, and they are reconstructed from very many fragments where positions can still be discussed. On these lists of tribute payers, you also find the Halikarnassos. Now to the first inscription that I will discuss a little more. Let us have a look at a less known Athenian inscription from this period, which illustrates diplomatic networking in practice at another level between Athens and an individual, a citizen of Halikarnassos. This fine stone is also now stored in the Epigraphic Museum here in Athens. It is a fragment, the lower part of a stele, an inscribed slab. It was found on the Acropolis, where it had been reused for the foundations of a later temple. You cannot see but it is a fine blue-white, probably pentelic marble. Top is missing, and you can see that it is very professionally cut. It's a so-called stoikedon, a very stern checkerboard pattern, where you just write until you come to the end. You don't think of if the word has finished. It must be in checkerboard, and that's the leading principle. From its appearance alone, it is obvious that this is an official inscription. In fact, it is 2 honorific decrees for one person, Leonidas from Halikarnassos. Most of the first decree is missing, but it will have presented the honorant and declared him proxenos of the Athenians. And this means that from now on he is officially part of the diplomatic network of the Athenians. He will be obliged to further the interests of the Athenians, especially in his hometown, Halikarnassos. The institution of proxeny was an old one, known to have functioned from the late 7th century BC until the Roman imperial period. Proxeny decrees became the single largest category of inscribed decrees. But at the time when our inscription was cut, the inscribed decrees were still relatively few. We do not know what made Leonidas extra interesting for Athens. Maybe details were given in the lost part, but not necessarily. The first decree ends in a formulation, if not standard, then often used, about how Leonidas will be protected from civil wrong in Athens and all cities that the Athenians control. It is specified who is to take care of this if it happens in Athens, and who if it happens abroad, in one of the cities that the Athenians rule over. It seems all to be Athenian officials. The second decree, in that it is specified that if anybody kills Leonidas in one of the cities that the Athenians control, then let the penalty be the same as if one of the Athenians had been killed. We know from elsewhere that killers will undergo heavy penalties, and that the city in which it happened can also be fined heavily. Then follows another praise of all that Leonidas has hitherto done for Athens. Note the detail given, and the final sentence on the publication of the decree comes here, and it is not so usual. As concerns Leonidas, the secretary of the council shall let what was decreed be inscribed in 2 stelae at the expense of Leonidas, and have one of them raised on the Acropolis, the other in Halikarnassos, in the sanctuary of Apollo. And Leonidas shall choose a man who shall transport the stele and have it raised. The first stele mentioned in the decree is the one which you see on the photo, of course. It was, as stipulated, raised on the Acropolis. And the second stele was for the sanctuary of Apollo in Halikarnassos. It is, in fact, the first, but not the last time that we meet the sentence saying that a stele with an inscription is to be raised in the sanctuary of Apollo in Halikarnassos. The decision to raise it was taken in Athens. What can we learn about the relations between Athens and Halikarnassos? The inscription is not firmly datable. The heading where it would have been seen is missing. But clearly it was issued by a state that, by a language that signals control over its empire. The letters are in the old alphabet, Attic alphabet, and datable to the second half of the 5th century BC. Then came a shift that was decreed. From then on, the official inscription should be in Ionic. The letter cutter has been identified as the two-chisel cutter. The few other inscriptions attributed to him are from the initial years of what is called traditionally the Peloponnesian War, or just before. They are all politically important inscriptions. The material used became a favorite in the 420s, but is now and then used before. Our inscription may have been among the trendsetters. For maybe we have a date antequem. The Athenian secretary responsible for the twin stelae was called Chariades. He is considered identical with the general Chariades, son of Aphiletos, who fell in battle against the Syracusans in Sicily in 427. Halikarnassos will have been reckoned among the cities that Athens ruled over and controlled. Its geographical position and history will have made it very interesting to uphold good relations with it. Leonidas must have been a man of means. All proxenoi would have to be able to meet the often considerable expenses of all kinds that the position entailed. It is not that common that the proxenus is also obliged personally to pay for his honorific stele, and in this case in two steles. We must think that it is an expensive letter cutter. What I think is exceptional is the way the procedure is stipulated. I do not think it is known from any of the other inscriptions. The Athenian secretary of the council is responsible for both inscriptions. The two stelae will be exactly the same. The secretary is responsible for having them raised, one on the Acropolis of Athens and another in the sanctuary of Apollo in Halikarnassos. And then the most exceptional, the honorant Leonidas is to choose a man who shall transport this twin stele to Halikarnassos and raise it in the sanctuary of Apollo. I think it all signals the importance of the message being an original twin of the one on the Acropolis. The right text, the right material, the right cutter, the right end position. The text was in the Attic alphabet, the alphabet of the ruler, if so understood, which might also impress the reader or spectator in Halikarnassos, where the inscriptions were in Ionic. It also signals uneasy times. In any case, it is a great honor for Leonidas to have the Athenian decree published this way, and it can easily be useful to be able to point to it in his hometown, both for good and for bad. Anyone can see that Leonidas is a friend of Athens and under her protection. and Athens is controlled by the Signians. Halikarnassos is controlled by the Athenians. We do not know if the second and identical stele ever reached Halikarnassos. The stone would be transported over sea and enter the harbor of Halikarnassos, which was nearly embraced by a promontory to both left and right. It is the one to the right, the eastern promontory, that carried the temple of Apollo on its top. And this is how this promontory looks today, dominated by the castle of the Crusaders, and this is today the museum. As you see, the temple of Apollo is no longer standing. As mentioned earlier, Paul Petersen is finishing his study of the temple of Apollo in Halikarnassos, and the stele found on the Acropolis here in Athens is one important piece in the puzzle. In the second stele, if it reached its destination, and why not, it will have found its place beside the probably oldest preserved official inscription cut in Halikarnassos. It was a law with wide-ranging consequences for the inhabitants, stipulating rules for otherwise disputable ownership of landed property. It appears from its final lines that the law would be cut in stone and placed for all to consult in the Apollonion, the sanctuary of Apollo. I can just point to one thing. You can see the difference. You can find plenty of omegas in the right inscription, none in the left. You can find a lambda in the right, like we know them, subtle, but in the left it is like this. We leave the time of the Athenian Empire, or the Athenian League, which the Athenians were forced to dissolve in 404. Soon after that, Halikarnassos was again under Persian rule, and before long Apollo had company on the promontory. Mausolus, the dynast, built his palace up there. He functioned as the satrap of Caria for the Persian Empire and had decided to move his residence from inland Mylassa to coastal Halikarnassos. Mausolus occasioned a fundamental change in the cityscape, included neighboring communities in Halikarnassos, and there was a new city plan and the aforementioned mausoleum, and we will come back to that later. If we were to rely only on the evidence of inscription, we would hardly know that Mausolus had been in Halikarnassos at all. Remnants of the palace of Mausolus has been located by the Danish Halikarnassos team, and it will be published by Pade and Paul Petersen within this year. Not one inscription mentions or can be connected to the palace of Mausolus, but the nearby sanctuary of Apollo continued for centuries to be where stelae with laws and decrees and many other official inscriptions were set up for at least 1,000 years. And now to the second inscription. Let us cross the entrance to the harbor of Halikarnassos and visit the promontory opposite the one with the sanctuary of Apollo. We leave the more sinister topics and meet a more poetic side of Halikarnassos. At the same time, we enter a new epoch in the history of the city. The Roman Empire had reached Asia Minor, and we shall have a look at an inscription from around 100 BC. This is, to the right you see the promontory, like it looks from one side today. This inscription was uncovered 30 years ago. It sat cut into a wall of a building complex near the waterfront. Today there is a resort for officers of the Turkish army at the promontory, but the Danish team was allowed to take some measures and make drawings, and an interpretation of the preliminary investigations was published by Poul Petersen and Birte Poulsen, and I published the inscription. An international symposium was held in Bodrum in 2000 in a collaboration between Bodrum Museum of Underwater Archaeology, the University of Southern Denmark, and the Danish Institute at Athens. The proceedings also include our results from the area. You can see that the inscription is very carefully cut. You can see that it is quite another style. It's the one to the right with the letter endings, very elaborate serifs. Yeah. And it is cut directly on one of the blocks in a wall. It will have been of utmost importance for the letter cutter not to make mistakes. Erasure is not an option. Letters can be dated roughly to the last part of the 2nd century BC or the beginning of the 1st. While it is easy to read all letters of the inscription, it is at the same time very difficult to understand. The inscription is in elegiac verse, a straightforward meter that creates no problem. But the, to us, anonymous poet was a very learned man who mastered the whole register of literature, from the classics like Homer and Hesiod and Pindar to the many learned poets of the Hellenistic period of his own time. The center of knowledge to poetry was now Alexandria, with a museum and the famous library, its famous library. Our poet chose to demonstrate this knowledge, and some footnotes would have been welcome. What we have is a small epos, a hymnic introduction to Halikarnassos, from the creation of the ordered world to the literary world of the poet's own time. I will give the contents short and prosaic, all difficult and poetic words left uncommented. It begins with an invocation of Aphrodite by the poet and his question. What is the pride of Halikarnassos? What is it she has to boast of? The poet never heard of it. Aphrodite has her temple shared with Hermes nearby. She hears the poet and readily answers his question. She holds the word for the rest of the poem and explains. Valiant men grown from the very earth of Halikarnassos saved and hid newborn Zeus from his father Kronos, who was just about to swallow his baby son. Zeus granted the men rewards great as their deeds, and they are, even at the time of Aphrodite's answer, the sacred guardians of a special cult near Zeus. Halikarnassos controls the beautiful dwelling of the water nymph Salmacis, to whom Aphrodite entrusted her child by Hermes. His name was, from his parents, Hermaphroditos. Hermes himself is not mentioned at all by name in the poem, but Aphrodite talks about Hermaphroditos as our child. When grown up to be an excellent man, Hermaphroditos invented marriage for mankind and was the first to fasten the matrimonial bed by law. The water nymph Salmacis, still at the time of Aphrodite's answer, tempers the savage mind of men by the waters from her spring. You may know quite another and dramatic story about Hermaphroditos and Salmacis in Halikarnassos. How Salmacis, love-struck, raped young Hermaphroditos underwater so that they fused to one person, and Hermaphroditos lost his manly character. This is from Roman Ovid's Metamorphosis. What you read on the wall in Halikarnassos is the city Halikarnassos version of the myth. The poem continues. Colonizers came from different parts of the Greek-speaking world, led by mythical figures. Athenians are mentioned first, then Peloponnesians, several waves, and Cretans. And what follows was also welcome. It is a catalogue of famous authors sprung from Halikarnassos. All is told in vegetal metaphors. Halikarnassos is the fertile mother of them all. Herodotus, the Homer of history in prose, Andron Panyasis, who is also a relative of Herodotus, and many others that I won't mention here and that are also to us less known. And then it continues, she bore other good men to succeed the good ones. The unending future will never finish enumerating all the proofs of her fame. Many glorious things she achieved on land, and she carries off many good things at sea with the leaders of the Hellenes. Halikarnassos has received an all-honorable reward for her pious acts, and when it comes to goodly deeds, she lays claim to the most honored crowns. Before we proceed, I should like you to lean back and listen. The inscription on the wall is a poem, but how can you feel that from my crude, short paraphrase in English? I contacted the former director of the Epigraphic Museum, Charalambos Kritsas, and he has always been ready to listen and to share his expertise in epigraphy. And when I discussed the Salmacis inscription with him years ago, he started to recite it. So I asked if he would be willing to record the poem for the present occasion, and he said, of course. Maybe you will be able to catch some words like Salmacis, Herodotus, maybe more, but the idea is just to listen to the recital as if it is a melody. It takes 4 minutes and a little.
The Salmacis inscription from Halikarnassos. Εν επέμει σχοινίτη, φίλων τη θάσευμα μεριμνών Κύπρη, μυροπνεύστων εμπελάτηρα πόθων. Της Halikarnassou τι το τιμίον, ουγαρέγωγε έκλειον, ή τι θροή γάβρα φριασωμένη. Γηγενέων μεγάλαυχων ετέκνωσε στάχην ανδρών, ακραίου πάρεδρον κιδαλίμιο διός, η πρώτη κύλινη ποδηράδα θέντων νεογνών πέδα ρέης κρύφιον ζήνα ατιταλόμενη γέης αμφαδίτησιν, ότε κρόνος αγγυλομήτης ουκ έφθη λαιμό θέστε υποβρύχιον. Ζεύς δε πατήρ γης, ίας αγακλέας οργιώνας θήκεν, η αρήτων πρόσπολης ισί δόμων, ουδάχαριν μόχθιο παρεδιός έσχον αμοιβήν, έργων ανταγαθών εσθλάκομιζόμενοι. Των τερατών μακάρεσιν αηδόμενων παραχεύμα Σαλμακίδος γλυκερών νασαμένη σκόπελων, νύμφης ημερτών κατεχιδόμων, íποτε κούρων ημέτερων τερπνές δεξαμένοι παλάμες, ερμαφρόδιτων θρέψε πανέξοχων, ως γάμον έβρε ανράσει και λέχεια πρώτος έδισε νόμο. Αυτή τε σταγόνων ιερής υπονάμαση άντρου, πριήνη φώτων αγριόεντανόων. Παλάστε, πτερόεντος επιέριον δαματήρα πηγάσου οικιστήν εσθλών επιγάγετο, εν θότε δις τύψασα με τύχνεση βελεροφόντεο πιδασίδος γέης τέρμονας ιδρύεται. Ναι μην και κραναΐο μέγας θένος εκ της αρίστους και κροπίδας ιερής εκθονής Αλμακίδος, ενδημίων τεχμή βασιλείδη κίδημος ήρος, λεκτούς εκ γέης άπιδος ηγάγετο. Then some verses are partly preserved. Άνθης τεκτριζίνος Ιών Ποσειδόνιος Υιός, Ανθεάδας, ίσα κοριστής, έθετο, Φιβίιος ίνης, κτισίν, χθονός ήγια Αριάδνην, πεδ έλειπεν, ενερίζος ενάπικον, ατιταλόμενος, στεφάνιν χερί δωρικών αυτήν, ίζη φίβου εφημοσύνες. Then the verses are fully preserved. Ηρόδοτον των πεζών εν ιστορίες συνόμηρον ήρωσεν, άνδρονος θρέψε κλητήν δύναμην, έσπηρεν πανίασιν επών αρίσιμον άνακτα, ηλιακόν Κυπρίαν τίκτεν αηδοθέτην, ιδέ τον εν μούσεση μενεσθέα κεδνών ανήκεν, ιδέ θεετή του πνεύμε ελόχευση ιερών, κομικών υμνοθέτην Διονύσιον ή ατεκνούτε, ζηνόδοτον τραγικών ίδρυν έτευξε πέων, δμόα Διονύσου φανόστρατον έσχεν αηδών και κροπηδών ιερής αυρών εν Στεφάνης, νόσον εν ιστορίες χρόνων σημάντορα τεύξεν, τιμοκράτην ποινητών γίνατα ειδοθέτην, άλλους τεξεσθλών εσθλούς τέκε, μυρίος αιών ούτε λέση δόξης πείρατα πάντα ενέπιν. Πολλά μεν εν χέρσο κάμεν αγλά, πολλά δε πόντο εσθλά, συν Ελλήνων ηγεμός υφέρεται, ευσεβαίων πάντιμον έχει γέρας, εν ταγαθή συνέργης κηδίστων αντέχεται στεφάνων.
I'm sorry that Kritsas couldn't be here this evening, or he sends his greeting. The interpretation of the poem are too many and too complex to enumerate here. Experts in different fields see different layers and angles. It is indisputable that it is an official inscription, and it is written by a learned poet for inscribing on this wall in about 100 BC, and it has the form of a small epos. It functions as a hymn to God-beloved Halikarnassos, the city's importance to mankind from the beginning, the saving of Zeus, the invention of marriage, important connections obtained by receiving the best of colonizers, and its exceptionally fertile cultural climate. Its position by the Salmakis fountain and Aphrodite must be significant. It is not certain which sort of building we have. Poulsen and Petersen suggest that the whole complex was probably attached to, or it formed part of the sanctuary of Aphrodite and Hermes attested by Vitruvius. Part A, which is contemporary with B and the inscription, was probably a stoa, possibly for dining and not least for tasting the soothing water of the Salmakis fountain. There has been, as you have understood from Ovid, there are several opinions of if the fountain had good water or water that hurt unmanned people. And Vitruvius knew the same version as we have on the wall. But what is not here? It can surprise that a mausoleum does not feature in this poem on the pride of Halikarnassos. After all, the mausoleum was placed centrally in the city and visible to all entering the harbor. And the mausoleum was on the list of the 7 wonders of the world already. The oldest text known to have listed the canon of 7 wonders is in fact a poem contemporary with the Salmakis inscription, a short epigram written by Antipater of Sidon. But these wonders of the world are in another category. They are marvels, incredibly large and costly in means and manpower, outsizing everything human. They were manifestations of power of a ruler. They were attractions. Antipater had visited them all, he said. The position of the Athenians in the list of colonizers may be explained what the citizen as well as a visitor from outside might meet and wonder about in Halikarnassos. It could explain enigmatic rituals or, for instance, the Ionian language in a city that ought to be Dorian. The part about the colonizers could be activated at any time in kinship diplomacy. The Halikarnassos could point to the verses of the early Athenian settlers and use it as a reason for the Athenians to send them help in crisis. They were family, ancient relatives. Kinship diplomacy was commonly used and far from being a new invention. Kinship, imagined or real, was a legitimate tool in diplomacy. And according to the Salmakis poem, Halikarnassos had kin in many parts of Greece. More likely, perhaps, in about 100 BC, the part on colonization will function to impress the reader, citizen as well as foreigner. Inscriptions are there for those passing by as well as for those with a special interest in them. Obviously, the position of this particular inscription is crucial. The Halikarnassians ordered the poem for performance and for inscribing in this building. Probably special rituals were performed here. The version of the Salmakis and Hermaphroditos myth speaks for rituals in connection with marriage, and likely many more visitors came here locally and from abroad and for other reasons. To end where we began, let us trace one of the authors whose name can still be seen on the wall in Halikarnassos, where he is mentioned as one of the famous authors that Halikarnassos fostered. The text says, she had the singer Phanostratos, the servant of Dionysus, that is, writer of drama for the theater, gleaming in sacred crowns of the Acropolis, that is, the Athenians. Phanostratos is not among the famous dramatists whose works survived to reach our scenes, but thanks to the special character of messages cut in stone, we have direct confirmation of the Salmakis poem from the foot as well as the top of the Acropolis of Athens. Phanostratos was a writer of tragedies, and in 307 he won the competition as the best author of tragedies here in Athens. Hence the wording gleaming in the sacred crowns of Acropolis. His victory was announced in connection, on the architrave of an Ionic gateway in marble, according to Hans Goethe, probably the first example of an architectural form whose later examples are known as triumphal arches or honorary gates. It was raised by the first known Agonotetes, competition director in Athens, and Phanostratos was the only foreigner among the victors mentioned. The architrave is not accessible for the moment. You must take my word for it that the 3 bands of the architrave each have 2 lines of the inscription mentioning the victors, or better. Look at this small fragment, which is now in the Epigraphic Museum and which I was kindly allowed to show. You can see how fine and regular the letters are. It's Phanostratos in number 3 line, but it says nothing that we could use to identify him. if we didn't have the rest. Halikarnassos was also honored by his fellow citizens by a bronze statue raised on the Acropolis here in Athens. Its base still there. We finish with a poet who also became a diplomat. Halikarnassos was shortly afterwards honored with the title of Proxenos of Delos, as witnessed by inscription there. From Athens to Halikarnassos and back, from the classical to the Hellenistic period, we can witness the varied interactions between these two communities and aspects of their cultural flourishing through the three inscriptions I have briefly set for your eyes. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Signe. Thank you for offering such a fascinating insight into the diplomatic and poetic connections between Athens and Halikarnassos, while also presenting the Danish Halikarnassos project.